Welcome to another event in our distinguished lecture series hosted by the UCLA Getty program in the conservation of cultural heritage. I'm Glenn Wharton, chair of the program, and I'm pleased to introduce you to today's speaker, Judy Baca. Her lecture is titled The Great Wall of Los Angeles by Judith F. Baca, Looking to the Past and Building the Future. We will also be joined today for our land acknowledgement and discussion following Judy's lecture by Lelania Velanoeth. One of America's leading visual artists, Judy Baca has created public art for 4 decades. Powerful in size and subject matter, Baca's murals bring art to where people live and work. In 1974, she founded the City of Los Angeles's first mural program, which produced over 400 murals, employed thousands of local participants, and it evolved into an arts organization, the Social and Public Art Resource Center, or SPARC. She continues to serve as SPARC's artistic director while employing digital technology in their digital mural lab to promote social justice and participatory public art projects. Judy is UCLA Professor Emeritus of Chicana and Chicano and Central American Studies. No doubt many members of our audience today who are affiliated with UCLA are aware of her 80-foot-long mural, La Memoria de la Tierra in Ackerman Union that was just recently unveiled. She seems to be everywhere these days, being highly recognized, including in a beautiful retrospective of her work that just closed at the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach. Lelania Velanoeth is a textile conservator in Los Angeles. She's held conservation positions at the Costume Center at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. She's also worked as an independent conservator at the Autry Museum of the American West, the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, and Los Angeles County Museum of Art. She's currently the Conservation and Collections Manager for the Civic Art Division of the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lelania to provide our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Glenn, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. We would like to acknowledge that as a land grant institution, UCLA and the UCLA Getty Conservation Program acknowledges the Gabrieleno Tongva peoples as the traditional land takers of Tonvagar, the Los Angeles Basin and South Channel Islands. We honor the elders in the past and present and the descendants who are part of the Gabrieleno Tongva Nation. We honor and respect the many First peoples still connected to this land on which we gather, and we commit our work and service to and in alignment with these values. Now we'd like to invite Judy to our Zoom stage to begin her presentation.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to speak with you about the Great Wall. And I prepared a presentation that gives you an overview of the historic work on the Great Wall. And I think it's important to begin with the notions that actually created the piece. Metaphorically, I refer to this work as the tattoo on the scar where the river once ran. And it is a perfectly appropriate way of speaking about the Great Wall, because the Great Wall is in the Los Angeles River. And what is actually the remnants of this historic river. This is perhaps what the river might have looked like when the founders came to Los Angeles. It was a river that expanded in the winters and contracted in the summers. And of course, this is an image of a Tongva, a Gabrielina, a woman who is an unknown woman that comes from the archives of USC, a photograph that is unknown, anonymous woman, perhaps a person who would have lived alongside of this river. But our city fathers and our founders, as Los Angeles expanded, made some decisions. I mean, all great cities around the world have been founded on the basis of a river, alongside of a river. You just think of the great cities, and you will see that they're associated with the river. Los Angeles River was a river that created problems for the founders. If you look at this photograph in Sonora Town, which was the development north of the Pueblo, you'll see something very strange. You see that the doorways are about 5 feet off the ground and staircases lead up to them. That's because the river was subject to flooding and destroying homes and developments. So in about the 1919 or the beginning of the 20th century, they began to concrete the river. And the concreting of the river was a taming of the river. And it began this building project. And as a child, I lived near the river and I watched these early developments, because it took them years to go through all of the arroyos of Los Angeles. And in the 70s, this building project, which constituted the largest building project in America, was complete. And this is what it looked like as the channels turned into concrete. They left dirt belts on either sides of the river. They created problems that were massive problems with the water not flowing to the aquifer, the carrying of refuge to the bay much more quickly. Everything from the streets of Los Angeles ended up in the river. So you can see here some of the aspects of this. In 1974, the Army Corps of Engineers approached me as I was running the City of Los Angeles mural program and asked me if I would consider working with them on a plan to create a park alongside of the river and to bring the mural program to this site. Because as they finished the building, they realized, unlike, the creator saying, we've finished this work, at 7 days and it was good, they began to see the outcome of the river. The spreading grounds had to be created. There had to be mosquito abatement. There had to be mitigation in terms of the refuge going into the river and so forth. And so this is at 1976, I began to work with a group of young people and to develop a plan for the creation of a work that would tattoo this giant scar. I saw it as the disappearance of the river and also the disappearance of the stories of the people. So here you can see the dirt belts on either side of the river, and this is what this area looked like at the time that we began. So in my own mind, the tattoo on the river, where the river once ran, was the sort of underlying metaphor, but it was not something that I could really speak out loud because it was very heretical to speak about the river being a mistake, the concreting of the river being a mistake. It was going to save real estate. It was going to make expansion possible. And that was, of course, the most valuable commodity at that particular point for the city of Los Angeles. So today, if you're looking back, this is about 750 feet short. You're looking at this work that it's gone over, literally half of my life to create a narrative that would recover the stories of the people and begin to place in the river a kind of narrative that would work across race and class. I grew up not far from the Los Angeles River in an area called Pacoima. And so I was very aware of the conflicts that were going on in this area between African Americans and Latinos. And it became possible for me, looking at the river, to think about, would it be possible for us to come from all these different places and create a kind of test tube of working across race and class, recovering our stories, and teaching young people from the ages of 14 to 21 to work together to create this giant work. I actually didn't intend for it to become now a half a mile long mural, but it took on its own character and its own life. And here you can see segments. This is perhaps one summer's work. We began to do a systematized application and show you a little bit of the process, because what was really important was the discovery of history that was not known, history that was not going to be in the history books. that were available to us at the time. This was before ethnic studies. This was before there were, narratives that were available in publications on Chicano studies or African American studies. We began to create a process of gathering the material, and then also to reviewing it through different prisms so that we could be really inclusive. And these prisms were very important. Of course, they are still the kinds of prisms that we have to use as we continue this work of age, race, gender, sexual preference, class, immigration status. This is a view of a historic slide that I pulled out of the archive to show a moment where I've asked artists to come together and take a look at some of our concepts. And the people in this room are kind of extraordinary people. This is Magoo from Los Four, Ed Burrell from the Bodacious Boogerillos, which was a theater group formed out of the Black Panthers. Judy Chicago, who's taking a look at the feminist aspect of work that we're creating. And Matt Worker, who's a Pulitzer Prize cartoonist. And here, a 24-year-old member of my design team. This is a design team made of Jewish participants as we're looking at Jewish contributions. So we were creating a new way of gathering history and looking for that not represented. And then of course, there was the issue of how to work with the people and how to create a method of bringing people who had long histories of conflicts between the racial divisions in our city, and our city being extremely segregated, creating a method of bringing people together from different neighborhoods and different racial groups and different gang groups, and balancing gender and neighborhood representation was really critical. This is a moment that's kind of a fun moment working in the classroom at Valley College. Every week we spent time working on the history, and these young people, none of whom are Chicano, are pretending to be a Chicano family, and they're stealing tires, they're working with all the racial stereotypes, and we're recording those stereotypes so that people could see, they're gang members, they're, they have these loud ghetto blasters and so forth, that these stereotypes actually are common. They're just different types of language between African American and Latino. We used theater techniques, and this is a mirroring game in which we looked at each other's body movements and how that described a person and how that had a particular representation or communication to one another. So we went in the very first summer, over 80 young people came to us through the juvenile justice system. All of them had to be arrested once to be on the project. And we were supported by juvenile justice money. This is an amazing moment. This is Beverly Robinson, who's a professor at UCLA in African-American studies, later, I think, in African-American studies before that existed. And she is teaching the kids dance on one of our Friday events. These are young people working on representation, and also in a game called Who I Thought You Were, because as they came together from these different neighborhoods, they of course had ideas about each other and were pretty terrified of one another because they really never went to school with each other even. So this is a kind of fun game, and also very poignant in creating a team. We made site visits. This is a really unusual photograph of inside of the Chinese catacombs that are underneath the streets of Olvera Street in downtown Los Angeles. Because of the miscegenous laws, and when the Chinese came, there were people who had an entire life underground, particularly women. There were opium dens, and there were, a whole kind of, society that went underground. And this is some of the photographs of the coolies of that time. These areas are not open to the public, and we found them on the Rec and Parks listings, and we're able to get into them. This is Amy Ishii, who's since passed, who was reading from her book called Camp Notes, and describing to the young people what it was like to wait in line with hundreds of people in the internment facilities during World War II. Also, people came. This is Bobby Bajorak, who's correcting us on the proper way to represent Native people's caring of children. And she came out with a full regalia and corrected us as we had placed the wrong kind of carrier on the figure. This one actually is correct. And then of course, people are finding aspects of their own family's history and relationship to some of the early land grants. This is the Harigi brothers with a kind of amazing discovery about their family's relationship to Griffith Park and to that land grant. Here we are working on the Chinese representation of the railroad. And this is typically, the Great Wall is a site that is a really, really difficult site. It's obviously, it's a river. And the water had to be removed from the site to be able to be painted. We had to create an encampment that was pretty much like a military encampment with water and food and toilets and entrances and methods of escape, because at any time we could be subject to a flash flood. And that was not the least of the problems. Our other problems was young people coming from the school systems in which they had very variant education. Reading a ruler was a challenge. Being able to work together was a challenge. And so these are all aspects of the Great Wall development, which is so much about the process of working with a team and the creation of a half a mile now narrative work with over 400 young people participating in the imaging of content that related to their own family stories. This is a blueprint from the 1930s section. And this gives you a sense of us finding the accurate information of the deportation of some 500,000 Mexican people from Los Angeles and California in 1933. These are the trains that were loading up people to take them away. This is our representation in a coloration that became the drawings that were used at the site. So here's the officers hurling back the alien horde. That's right directly from the newspaper at the time. And then it turns into a blueprint. The coloration turns into a blue line application, gridded, then it becomes a full coloration. Now, the young people are doing all of the work on this work, and it's pretty amazing that these naive hands are able to get it to a place where a finishing team of the best of our painters can bring it to completion. Also, interviewing people that were part of these stories, so lived experience was really important to us. And we interviewed people from the Fighting 442nd and learned, for example, that they were the most decorated group during World War II, this regiment, and they were recruited out of the internment camps. The 1950 sections begins with Rosie the Riveter being sucked into a TV set by a woman with a vacuum cleaner, and the American family, 2.5 children, howdy doody, making up the half in the Pink Ghetto, which is suburbia, the development of this region. The Red Scare and McCarthyism, a house of trash can made up of people from the blacklist and the House on Un-American Activities meeting. Even the typewriter is pink, as if it is communist. The division of the Barrios occurred when the freeways came in, and this is from the 1950s, and Dodger Stadium descends into the oldest Mexican part of our city. And this is the forebearers of civil rights, with Paul Robeson in the front here. Behind him is Rosa Parks, Gwendolyn Brooks, Ralph Bunche, and at the very back is Martin Luther King, because it's the 1950s and he hasn't yet reached total prominence. Big Mama Thornton is with the microphone, who is the person who sang You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog, and who Elvis Presley borrowed heavily from. The cops are going into the closet as they are doing the vice entrapments. And at this time in the 1950s, if you were gay, you could be denied a job, and you could be denied the capacity to work. And this is Harry Hayes with a call in the beginning of the first organizations for gay rights. The Daughters of Bilitis on the left, and You can see the vice entrapment, which is a mouse trap, and these members of the Mattachine Society wearing faces to kind of hide their real identity, looking into a mirror that would be the world that they would choose if they could. So here we are with the Howl and the Venice West Cafe, the boarding school movement that took Native people from their families and boarded them for sometimes up to 4 to 6 years away from their families, and tried to make them American, tried to make them less Native. And one of those people was a wonderful Olympic champion, and this is him running in his through the fields of his home. And this is Billy Mills, who actually came to visit us and to talk with the young people about his experience becoming a gold medal winner. So not only was the history researched deeply, but it was also made a living history. And as we have gone through this process, we realize that the young people who painted this are also now part of this history. They make up the story that makes the Great Wall story. These are different crews, including the young woman in the foreground with a blue shirt, who was the one person who was actually survived an event in the channel where the water came rushing down in a time when a rainstorm came, and the young people our team tried to save our materials, and she was washed down the channel 6 miles and rescued by helicopter. It's quite an amazing story that she survived it. And of course, it is a reminder of how difficult this site is and this place is. This is all one family, and they're getting an award because they provided the most children to the project. This is the Martinez family. And this is a particular story I wanted to take a moment about to show you. And this is Ernestine Jimenez, who at 14 years old was pregnant and came onto the project, and I was told by many of the counselors in the region that she should not be on the project, and that we should not give her a job because she had such a history of conflict with the African American community. This is her 2 years later on the crew. I decided to take her anyway, and I had a particular affinity with Ernestine. Ernestine and I have been friends now for over 40 years. And this is her son. And the image on the right is her son 30 years later, when she's giving an interview with the National Hispanic Association, as I'm getting a national award at the Kennedy Center. And they interviewed her, and this is her brief story, just 3 minutes.
The way I grew up is, you fight through life. I've got 10 brothers and 6 sisters, and I'm the baby. And it was a fight in my house all the time. And that's the way I believed you're supposed to have grown up, to fight through life. Don't like nobody but your own race. And even sometimes don't even like your own race. There was a lot of tension. I think everybody wanted to fight everybody, just the way they looked, or the way they looked at them, or the way they dressed. And after time, you just started getting to know that person as an individual instead of knowing them as you were taught to, and everybody became very good friends. It took a lot of growing up.
You see,
I'm not saying that first year did it. It didn't. It took a lot of growing up. But I made a lot of friends through 4 years. And every year I understood something else. Every year. I wouldn't have went back to high school because I wouldn't have had a role model to push me to go there. Education was Judy's #1 thing. As long as I stood in school, you could come back and paint the mural. And that's what Even though I got in trouble in school and fought and everything, that was my #1 goal. I wanted to come back. I had to come back. What really kind of freaked me out though is when I met the people that, when we painted the mural of the Holy Cross, and I met the people that had the tattoos on them, that kind of blew my mind. That made me cry. Because I know there was another world that was harder than mine. And I just really felt for it. This mural opened my eyes so much. Even when I'm down and out, I still walk by here. And I think God, I did accomplish something in life. And it makes me feel good. And I think if it wasn't for this mural, for me to have my name on it and to have accomplished something, I don't know where I'd be.
So Ernie is one of these, of the 400 young people who worked on this project. And this is another one of our young people who worked with me when he was 14. He's now an art director building giant sculptures in Dubai and various places around the world. And he spoke out early about the restoration of this work. So the initiation for the restoration also came from the young people. Here's 2 members of our team who are part of our alumni group and will be helping us with the next segments. The mural has now been declared a National Historic Site and it was restored completely in 2011 with support from the California Cultural Humanities Division and also the City of Los Angeles. Over a 40-year period, the work began to delaminate. We lost color. We had a problem of an infestation of trapdoor spiders in these holidays in the wall when the concrete casting. You can see the areas of it. You can see the areas of it coming apart and coming off in sheets. But what is remarkable is that in fact, what's remarkable is that we didn't lose more of the mural over the years. And when we went back to produce it, we were able to go back and review the way that it was painted. And this is actually really interesting because I led that restoration. And the restoration was done very much similarly to the way we did the work, with the engagement of the community, with people taking ownership. And this is we call this the Great Wall Bubble Bath of Great Cleaning. One of the things in the channel is that when the river does run water, it actually washes the surfaces of the site. But to work in the site, again, it's the preparation for the safety of people is paramount. You see this upstream dam has now been one of our must pieces of equipment and tools as we work on the restoration or any time that we're in the channel. Today, the piece is being lit. This is actually Ernestine as a supervisor, from gang member to supervisor of other young people, and handing out flowers to the members of her team. This is one of my fun and favorite parts of this presentation, because you can see damaged work in the first 1,000 feet that was done by the first 80 young people from the juvenile justice system. And then its restoration, before and after. Before, after, before, after, before, and after. Would that it be this easy. It was quite difficult. I led 30 painters in this production in 118-degree weather on occasion. And of course, with all of the trappings of the fear that somebody might release the dam, even though we have all the safety precautions in place. We have to have like a 30-minute, less than 30-minute removal of all things in the channel to be in that site. Before, after. So you get the idea about, as we're painting, it's like knowing the process of the application of the color we're making permanent applications of, we're doing in painting, but we're actually painting with the same materials that we produce the work with. And we're able to trace the same methods, like looking at the 5-part system of the application, looking at, let's say, for example, the darks going in violets and knowing that it will come up in cadmium yellows. That is from the knowledge of the way the paint was applied. Here's the Fighting 442nd, who make up the fabric of America, complete restoration of it. So the entire mural is restored and is in great condition. It is in the process of being lit. We now have lamps that will be lit shortly that will light the entire mural at night, which means it'll be a walking place for people that has never been. It's a very dark park, and it will be accessible at night. And we are putting up a pedestrian bridge that was allowed to be damaged and not restored and left in terrible condition for like almost 12 years and unusable, between the high schools on one side and the neighborhood on the other. And that bridge is in the process of being built. So this gives you an idea of the completion of the monument. This is now supported by the Mellon Foundation, who has given us a grant to complete the bridge and to do the next segments of designing for the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, all the way up to 2020, because we reached only the 1950s in our productions. And also to complete the building of this bridge. You can see the laser cuts that will be on the railing. This will represent in one direction the animals that lived in the river, lived around the river, and on the other side, facing the ocean, all of the sea life that was evident that in fact is no longer evident, because even in my memory, I can remember the flying fish in the Santa Monica Bay. So all of these images will be there. And again, an educational thing for people to understand the relationship between the social history and the environmental history of this region. So part of our plan is to take the mural, this is our dream plan, is to take the mural production indoors and to put it on a substrate and then to apply it so that we can actually have, imagine restrooms and lighting, air conditioning, and an environment that is safer and better for all of our teams, and that can be working year round on the new segments for the 60s and 70s. And so we've just begun some of these sketches. This is the generation on fire. Their fire is being put out by the fire hoses of the Montgomery, Alabama police. The lunch counter segments here are in development right now, looking at people doing the sit-ins in Woolworths. Well, Nina Simone sings Mississippi Goddamn in the background. So that's our plan for the Great Wall continuation and completion. I hope that gave you a sense of the complexity of the production, and of course the complexity of the continuance of the work. I'll end there. Let's see, stop sharing here.
Judy, thank you so much for such a wonderful lecture. I have to say, your work has had a profound effect on me over the years as I've watched the development of your work. But I remember, I mean, it must have been 20 years ago, sort of thinking about the conservation of the Great Wall of Los Angeles. And, you know, as a traditionally trained conservator, we're taught never to repaint faded paint, to work professionally with scientists. And we were just not trained to work with community members. You know, and I remember, you know, learning about the work that you were doing with the community. And as you say, you developed a methodology of bringing people together from the neighborhood to design and execute the mural. And then when you argued that the community should be involved in conserving the mural, I was initially just taken aback, thinking, well, no. I mean, it was great that you did that, but now professionals need to come in, like me, or my colleagues who work on murals. But I really came around over the years and thinking that if community engagement is part of the mural, then how can you not bring in community to conserve the mural? That it, you can't do it because it's integral to what the mural actually is. And that was a major transformation in my own development as a conservator. Could you speak to that a little bit more about the importance of, or why you took that approach?
Well, I think actually when you're looking at the conservation of a work like the Great Wall, that part of it is conceptual. Conceptually, the mural is the disappeared story of the people in the disappeared river. So metaphorically, they're connected. And I mean, and a mural is made in connectedness. It's connected to the architecture, it's connected to the community for which it's painted, it's connected to the people who make it. And so the preservation of the Ernie story, for example, Ernestine's story, I mean, what became of Ernie was that she became a caretaker for older Jewish people. I mean, she didn't go and get a doctorate, right? But she survived a really difficult 16th child in a very poor family in Pacoima. And the fact that she survived that life and having been a gang member and then became a caretaker, I think it's a great triumph. So in other words, what we're preserving is not only the 2 millimeters paint on the surface of the wall, but the entire story of the people and the relationship they have to the making of this imagery that recovers them and recovers what is truly the American story. And I think if we had done better at this, maybe we wouldn't have a country so terribly divided.
So Judy, not just your mural, but all public artworks. How do you feel about the existence of public artworks where one, a public art agency or whoever is the steward of the artwork is not caring for it? And how do you feel of public artworks existing in communities where community members aren't involved in the act of preservation, conservation, or restoration?
Well, I mean, I think it's really complicated these days, right? I mean, we're looking at memorials that are, the General Lee memorials, or the, being in the South and watching some of them, like I was at Washington Lee University, in which the memorial for the horse of General Lee was larger than the memorial for the slaves that built the whole university. And there was a small plaque, and then they had this mausoleum for the horse, so at which they opened every night so the horse could wander the grounds. I mean, so in other words, the value system is played out in what is preserved. And what I would say is that it's censorship in the rear. In other words, who has the power and who has the money and who has the capacity to preserve their history and their story is who gets to basically write a narrative about who we are. And so I think it's really important for, I fall down on the side of leaving those egregious soldiers on horseback, with the pigeons on their head. I think because it reminds us of this time in our history. But what is important is that we create new monuments that speak, that there's a kind of dialogue going on about the complexity of it. And I think, municipalities have a hard issue to deal with because they have a choice. Can they bring back the artist? I'd say absolutely where you can. If the artist is living, if the artist is willing. Not all artists want to go back. I mean, because it was a painful experience to begin with. I mean, doing the Great Wall restoration was tough, right? It was very tough. Controlling every palette of 30 painters working a half a mile at one time. Oh my God, I had a golf cart running up and down, and still it was really a rough thing. And I don't think that conservators that come from, you know, traditional Getty practices are prepared for what they face. I was literally at the Great Wall, for example. I was literally fighting to keep the capacity to restore that work myself. At the time that Glenn and I were at Harvard in that famous event where Glenn was speaking and I was speaking, we were getting tomatoes thrown at us, sort of positing these ideas that maybe people should be engaged. And you were dealing with the Kamehameha monument, which was an extraordinary story. I mean, I think we have a very complex thing to deal with right now, very complicated. But I fall on the side of keep those monuments. The stand where people were sold into slavery on the corner in the southern city, very important to be there. So that every day when you walk by, you have a memory of that moment in time, in history, and recognize that's part of the whole story. And then looking, you can mark our progress and you can see another idea, perhaps on across the street by another artist or another monument that will give you a different idea.
I'd love to follow that up and talk about Confederate monuments with you, but I would rather talk about, because I think we could just go on if we started that, went down that route. But you know, your mention of preserving objects from the past, no matter, you know, what our current values are that we associate with them, makes me think about all of the murals that we've lost, and the lack of maintenance, the lack of care. Could you talk a little bit about that? That's sort of, you know, what your thoughts about the erasure of communities when their art is not preserved.
I've heard people say that they feel like they are being erased, you know, when a piece comes down. And we've probably lost, I would guess, I mean, having been engaged in putting up hundreds and hundreds of murals and supporting others to do so over the years here at SPARC, we probably lost 60% of the legacy of Los Angeles murals. We were the mural capital of the United States. Now, Philadelphia has taken that position, and actually is a woman who runs that was trained in our program and went to Philadelphia, and there's something like 2,000 works in the city of Philadelphia. But we were talking recently in a Zoom in which we were describing really the problems, the differences in the two cities. And it really has to do with city leadership. It has to do with how our cultural affairs divisions are constituted, how we you know, perceive approval processes and all those kinds of things, how we set up a structure for the creation of public art. But I think, you know, the loss of these works has been a decision. And perhaps one of the worst things that occurred for us was the mural abatement order that occurred when we were trying to deal with the billboard companies and the advertising companies claiming that they were making murals so that they could avoid fees. And so the way to stop them from covering every square inch of our eye space with ads was to just put an abatement on everything. And it was really effective at stopping muralists, but not so effective at stopping advertising, because they didn't care. They just pay fee. They just pay the fines. So Los Angeles made a critical error in that. And then the other is not to put preservation or, you know, conservation so that a blank wall gets cleaned, like on the freeway, on my piece on the freeway, the Hitting the Wall mural, the Olympic mural. A blank wall next to it will be cleaned immediately by Caltrans cleaning crews. The mural itself will not. So therefore the mural becomes the privileged site to hit. And that's how the change has occurred. Because early on in our early years, a graffiti artist would respect the mural. And that has shifted because now it's get up at any point. How do you get up and how can you stay up? Well, you can damage a piece of art because we don't maintain art. So in other words, that's a decision, isn't it? the decision that we need to speak about.
So this leads actually is related to my question, because you're such a wonderful advocate for your artworks, the preservation of your artworks, preservation of public art. I don't think any of my bosses are on the call today, but so I can acknowledge that, you know, municipalities love shiny new things, new artworks, new sculptures, new murals, but the act of preservation and conservation is not a priority.
Yeah.
So how would you recommend, and how have you in the past, or how would you, what can we do as community members to advocate alongside artists to preserve and maintain artworks to the stewards of those artworks?
Well, I mean, there's so many ways that community can be engaged. I mean, like, you know, it's bringing back, for example, on the Great Wall now, we have the alumni of the Great Wall helping us with the new segments and becoming advocates for the preservation of that work. But I have seen it. There was a mural that was done in on Jefferson and the city center by Mary Lynn Hughes and her partner Zachary, and they painted a piece called "Love Is for Everyone," and it was about the AIDS epidemic and the number of people lost, and in the Black community. And it was almost like it was like a quilt with the names of all these different people. And as we were preserving, it was painted over, because that's what's happening when something gets graffitied. It'll get painted over before it'll get restored. So it's destroyed. So there's an egregious act, and then on top of that, another egregious act, the destruction of the art. And so the mural was completely gone, and we removed the whole this overpainting. And as that was happening, people came up and said, "Oh, thank you. That's the image to my boyfriend or my son or my," and they started talking about the representation coming back. And I think that we should be recording those things, you know, to get these videos and get them into the hands of decision makers. And every time something is about to be destroyed, we need to stand up. We need to say, no. You know, there was at one point almost, I was leading tours at one point, which was really fun, of the Virgin of Guadalupe. There were 350 versions of Guadalupe that were painted on little markets, little mercaditos, you know. And they're not all professional painters, but here she was. She would appear on a Korean market. She would appear on, and what she meant was, we're friendly to Mexican people. We understand those icons that are significant to you. So people would come and put candles there, and they would put flowers there. And of course they would frequent that business. And at a certain point, it was another religious group that thought that Virgin Mary was getting too much credit. And so they went around destroying her because they were an evangelist group. So we lost those murals. But as that kind of egregious act is starting to occur, there needs to be more noise. We need to be speaking more. And we need to have authorities speak, not just a community speak. Somebody from the position of culture saying, this is culturally inappropriate to destroy this. So I think we need to, you know, hold hands here and pay attention to what matters to people. Maybe you don't think the Virgin of Guadalupe is so important, but it certainly meant a lot to the people who put them up and the people who preserve them. So I think that's what I would advocate for, is like stronger voice. And here's the other thing. Every new work that is commissioned should have a maintenance plan. That's not so difficult, right?
Well, you're talking to two conservators here, so I think we would probably agree with you, and hopefully our audience would as well. You know, yeah. So it really is. We just need community activists. We need the artists. We need the professionals, the public art advocates, the funders out there to all be working together on this joint effort to preserve our cultural heritage. You know, we only have a couple more minutes, and I'd like to turn the conversation a little bit to your own legacy. I'm always so much, I just admire artists that think about their own future with their archives, and to sort of prepare for people to be able to learn about their work, especially artists as important as you. Could you talk a little bit about your archives and what you're doing to preserve your legacy?
Oh, I have to say that really a wise person years ago, when I didn't even think of something like this, told me that if I didn't preserve my history, and I credit with an open heart Judy Chicago, who said that to me. She used to tease me. She'd say, "Judy B, this is Judy C." And I want to tell you, there was a generation ahead of me, and she said, "You must preserve your own work because no one else will." And I just thought, wow, and document, right? Document. So I began methodically to do documentation, and also I found it really important for my development. Like, what did I try here that didn't work? And those archives are here at SPARC, and I've been fortunate enough to be affiliated with this organization for so many years, and so I have a pretty massive archive, which is and also because I wasn't a person that was so involved in the market, the art market, so I didn't sell work, and I had all this work, and that's what became the retrospective. But I think it's very important for artists to preserve their process and their methods, and I have been pretty diligent in doing that. But I think one of the things that I'm overwhelmed by is, like, then how do you manage all this? I never expected to be managing these pieces after I made them. You know what I mean? And we so need the conservators to help us think about the preservation. Like, nobody wanted to be engaged in acrylic on concrete kind of conservation, but that's where we need you guys. We need conservators to begin to help us think about that, and think about new substrates, and think about new methods, which we've been pretty alone in doing in the making world, in the world of the makers.
And you've also been so innovative in your own approach to mural creation, with the incorporation of digital technologies in not just the documentation, but actually in the creation of the murals as well.
Exactly. And technology we should not fear, because it is actually amazing. Gives us all kinds of new possibilities. The mural at UCLA is on glass, printed with mineral, not ink. It's a digital work, and it's going to last. It's going to be amazingly long-lived because of that.
Okay, well, we're up against the hour here. Do you have any final remarks, Lelania, or thoughts, questions?
No, I just want to say thank you. Your work has been incredibly inspiring to me, as someone who, as a conservator, is now in a position of preserving public artworks and murals in my position now. So maybe I can reach out to you and ask you questions later. Yeah. But of course, always, find support with us, with conservators, always. And we're very thankful.
I want to say I'm really grateful that this is happening, and so happy to hear that is now within the thoughts of the county, and that people are beginning to pay attention. And I was thinking about Josefina Quesada, who came to work on the Siqueiros mural and never got to work on America Tropical, but I knew her well, and we commissioned her, and that her piece on the library, the Actors Library, I forget his name.
Anthony Quinn Library.
Anthony Quinn Library, yes. And we went and did that conservation. So important for us to remember Josefina, right? Yes. Even though she's gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Judy and Lelania, thank you so much. I would just like to end by saying I think I've been around in the field for quite a few years, and I've seen a big shift in our own field of conservation, where we are working now with artists as partners and colleagues, but also often working with community members. And I think certainly here at the UCLA Getty Conservation Program, it's one of our central themes is community engagement and collaboration. But it was really pioneered by artists like you. So thank you so much for everything you've done and continue to do. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Nice to chat.
Thank you.
Right.